Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining us tonight for a really, really important discussion. We are truly honored to be joined this evening, or should I say this afternoon, by Yaakov Horowitz. Rabbi Horowitz is an author, a child safety advocate, and a parenting mentor. He's the founding dean of Yeshiva Darchei Noam of Monsey. He's the director of Bright Beginnings, and he's the publisher of 2 child safety books that are in over 120,000 homes in 3 languages. He also received the prestigious 2008 Covenant Award in recognition of his contribution for Jewish education. And I think Rabbi Horowitz is probably most well known for the amazing things that he has been doing on social media in order to help us to help our children. And he sends out the very popular Bright Beginnings under a minute parenting clips daily. They're available on Instagram and WhatsApp. And if for some reason you aren't subscribed to them yet, I'm sure that after the talk tonight you will be. But along with that, he has other materials about parenting, about child safety, about helping abuse survivors. All of these things have been such a ray of light in what I think can sometimes be a very, very dark world. And particularly over the last few weeks, it's become clear to all of us just how dark it can be, just what an important topic this is. And recently, Rabbi Horowitz addressed the rabbinate here in the UK over Zoom. I can tell you that it was a tremendous source of chizuk, of inspiration for us. And I'm now so honored to invite him to address our kehilot, the 2 communities joining together tonight, Magen Avot and Hendon United. Rabbi Horowitz will talk to us about how we can empower our kids and how we can keep them safe. So Rabbi Horowitz, thank you for giving of your time. I'm not going to waste any more of it. I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rabbi Joel. Welcome, everyone. And I really hope that you will find this helpful. The idea is, as it says in the flyer, and as the rabbi said, it's about empowering you. It's about giving you the tools to be able to keep your children safe. Now, you know, child safety is it's a comprehensive, it's a comprehensive thing. It's not about one talk. It's not about one conversation with your children. It's about a process. It's about educating yourselves and educating your children. It's about dialogue. It's about getting the children comfortable talking to you about anything. And again, these skills, especially that last one, is really important. In any relationship, especially raising children in a complicated time. So that's a very important piece of it. I'm going to give you the tools to help you have these conversations, to learn about what research shows is effective, and most importantly, not to frighten you, and I don't do that, but rather to empower you. The research shows that if we frighten our children when we talk to them, and we present this in a way that unstabilizes them and they feel uncomfortable, then they don't remember the details. So I take a page from that and do the same with you. And look, it's about really understanding that it's a challenge. It's been a challenge all the time. Thankfully, we're becoming more aware, and we're understanding that this has to be a part of our parenting toolbox, and that's a great thing. You know, I was a number of years ago, I was lecturing in a very large Beis Yaakov here in the States, across the pond, and one of the Rebbitzins said, Rabbi Horowitz, it's such an important talk, and I'm so glad you're doing it, but what's with this generation that we need a talk like this? May Hashem forgive me. I just blurted out. I said, "Yeah, remember the good old days when nobody did anything about this?" So it's not bad that we're talking about it. It's good that we're talking about it. It's a positive step. It's not this generation. These things have been going on since the beginning of time. So let's talk about what research shows to be most effective. And there are 4 components of of this conversation that you should be considering having with your children. Number 1 is tell the children that no one's ever allowed to come between you and them. meaning no one's ever allowed to tell them to keep secrets from you. That's number one. Number two is teach them the notion of the ownership of their personal space, to get them aware of the fact and cognizant of it and understand that they have a right to their personal space. Again, we'll talk about these in detail. The third is good touching, bad touching. Some touching is okay, some touching is not okay. And the fourth is that no one has the right to make them feel uncomfortable. And what we're really telling them is to trust their instincts. And if they feel uncomfortable with any adult or any child, or a peer of theirs, and they feel that something is not right, they should get out of that situation, and that you will back their right to do so. Okay, that's the big idea. Now, it's important that we understand, the backstory. Why are these things effective? In fact, I'll ask a question that I thought of many, many times 20 years ago when I began realizing what a big problem this was. How could you possibly teach a young child to protect themselves against a much stronger and larger adult? And it was almost like a sense of yish, of giving up hope. Like, how could you possibly stop this? And what emerged from the discussions is that, and again, this is the biggest idea of all, the big picture is that the abusers very rarely start with a child that they haven't seen before, and the first time they engage with a child, God forbid, they abuse them. It's extremely rare. Depending on the study and depending, I guess, on the country and some of the culture, it's less than 5%, according to virtually all studies. It's a very small minority. It's much more likely that the abuser is someone who knows the child and slowly builds up that relationship until they feel that they'll be able to, God forbid, get away with this. And what's helpful to think about is, what do abusers, which type of children, what skill sets do children have to have, or what attributes do they have to have that would make an abuser, chas v'shalom, less likely or unlikely to start up with them. And basically, it's children who are educated, who understand what we'll be talking about, and children who have close relationships with their parents. Those are the two, research shows, the experts say that those are the two most important things that we could teach our children. Why? Because abusers will be concerned about starting up with a child who is close to the parents, and a child who is educated about their right to privacy, about their right to not to be made to feel uncomfortable. So ideally, an abuser would like a child that's isolated, chas v'shalom, and a child that's not knowledgeable. One example that I give to explain this is, think about if someone is trying to steal money from someone else, if someone's a thief and they want to do some sort of a scam, some sort of a dishonest presentation that will get them some money, that they'll be able to steal money from the individual. They're also looking for people who aren't financially knowledgeable. They're not going to want to try a scam with someone who's an accountant or someone who's very knowledgeable about numbers. They're much more likely to start with a young couple that has wedding money, but they're not learned they're not well versed in finances. And even better would be if they would find this young couple that moved from a different country and doesn't know anyone here. Because even if the couple doesn't know it, the scammer, the person who wants to steal from them, doesn't know who they're going to talk to. These are basically the two things. So connection, family connection, and knowledge, those are the best things to protect your children. Of course, it's part of a package. It's about supervision. It's about being in touch with your children all the time. It's about many other things, but that's the big idea. Okay, so you can empower your children by understanding this yourselves and by teaching them what they need to know and by letting them know they can talk to you about anything. Okay, so here are the four components with a little more detail. Again, I'm going to be presenting for about another 20 minutes, and then I'd like to open to your questions. I think that's really an important component of this talk, is to give you the opportunity to be able to ask whatever questions are on your mind. Okay, so no secrets from parents. That's a huge red flag. Nobody ever should be able to, it's not appropriate for anyone to tell your child that, this is between us. Even, even a person who's well respected in the community, even a person like myself, when I stepped down from my yeshiva a number of years ago to work on child safety, but I was a school principal for 22 years. I was a Rabbi for 15 years before that. There is no conceivable set of circumstances that I should ever tell a child that, this is between us. Don't talk to your mother. Don't talk to your dad about this. So that's number one. Just teach the children and tell them that if somebody does tell them to keep a secret from you, they should tell you right away, and you'll reward them. You'll be very proud of them for doing so. A story, if I may, something that got me aware of how powerful this education could be. This was almost 25 years ago. Before the summer, I wasn't working in the child safety space, so I didn't feel qualified to give the talk. I brought in a mental health professional to speak to the parents in my school, and he basically gave this type of presentation. So one of the things he told the parents is, tell your children no one's allowed to tell them to keep a secret from the parents. True story. So this is right before the summer. This was in June. The next year, Shavuos time, which was like 11 months later, our second grade teacher was making an art project. The kids were making flowers to bring home for Shavuos. So the teacher, in all innocence, told the kids, it was a 2-day project. So the kids did the cutting and gluing, then they lined the things up to dry overnight. They were going to paint it the next day. So the teacher tells them on the way out, he says, kids, don't tell mom, please. Don't tell mommy, it's a surprise. Don't tell mommy, please. Shh. And I kid you not, it was literally a transformative moment for me in terms of child safety education, because we always wondered, are the kids really listening? They don't listen when I talk to them. I told you, don't fight with your sister. 2 minutes later, they're doing the same thing. So you think to yourself, like, they're not never going to remember this. So we dismissed at 4:15 in the afternoon. That's when the bus we have, I don't know if you have that in the UK, we have, school buses take the kids home. So we dismissed at 4:15, and quite literally, my cell phone started ringing a few minutes later. And virtually every parent, maybe every parent is an exaggeration, at least 50% of the parents called me. And the school was much smaller at the time. Everybody had my cell phone number. He says, Rabbi Horowitz, you're not going to believe it. Shimon burst in and says, Mommy, Mora told us not to tell you. And I told them, by the way, when when the presentation was done in our school, I said, tell the kids you're going to give them a reward if somebody, that's not in the literature, but I'm a pragmatic person. So I said, if your kids tell them that if someone tells them to keep a secret from them and they tell you, you'll give them a reward. So the kids came in, hey, Mommy, Mora said you shouldn't tell you. Put their hands out, pay up. And the parents, nobody thought it was inappropriate. Nobody thought it was. They understood what it was. They were shocked that the kids remembered, as I was. Like, this stuff really works. It's not perfect. But, when we do this training about fire safety or other things like that, we know that if you don't remember all of it, it is effective even a very long time later. Okay, so no secrets from parents is number one. Your body belongs to you. And we're teaching children the notion that they have a right to their personal space. And it's not only their body, things belong to them. And parents, you can support this notion in the minds of your children by giving them these messages all the time, that your things belong to you. Knock on someone's door when you go into the room. They might be getting dressed, even within a family, let's say. And you have your own drawer, you have your own space where you keep your things. And if someone wants to take something, one of your siblings, they should ask you first because it's your space. Okay. There's some stunning research that Dr. David Pelkowitz, who was kind enough to mentor me many years ago in this subject. Yeah, I think they just released a study at the time, it was about 20 years ago, that they found that children that had their own drawer at home, they had their own space at home, were more likely to exhibit defensive behavior if someone tried to invade their space. Even a small thing like that made a difference. So because it got the idea in their minds that they're entitled to have some privacy of some things. That something transfers to other things as well. I often tell parents something I did, with our yeshiva and the talmidim, my students. If the children, and you can certainly do this at home, if the children are quarreling with each other, you can talk to them about not fighting. You can talk to them about having shalom. You could also say, you are in Rifki's space. And that's what I used to do in yeshiva. Kids would fight, they go in the playground. And from one end of the playground to the other, I would go like this. And everybody knew what that meant. This is a box. You're in somebody else's box. You're in somebody else's space. So there are so many ways that you can reinforce this notion of personal space. Good touching, bad touching. Some touching is okay. Some touching is not okay. Typically, there are many ways to speak about this. A very tsanua way, an appropriate way is just to tell your children that, a spot covered by a bathing suit, that usually works for boys and girls, that nobody should touch them in a spot that's covered by a bathing suit. So that's rule number 3. And the experts say that because we automatically have exceptions to this rule, especially when the children are young, because if we're telling them nobody could touch you in a private space, well, they get bathed that night and they have a babysitter and they have a mora, a ganena, someone in school that takes care of them if they dirty themselves. So the experts say that we should tell our children no one's allowed to touch you in a private spot that's covered by a bathing suit, and you shouldn't be touching anyone else. No one should be looking at your private space, and you shouldn't be looking at other children's private space. But the important part is that when we list the exceptions, we should list them very succinctly in a very clear, in a very clear way, without resorting to generalities like no one should touch you in a private space except for people in our family, let's say, or people that we know well. Because, as hard as it is to imagine, a very significant percentage of abusers are from families. So therefore, succinctly, in other words, no one should be touching you in a spot covered by a bathing suit except for a doctor during an exam when mom or a dad are in the room. Grandma, Bubby comes over to babysit and we're not home. She can touch you in a private space. So, basically, if you have an ozeret, if you have help at home, very, very specifically and succinctly, so they understand that you're not giving a blanket exemption. And finally, no one has the right to make you feel uncomfortable. That's a little bit more. The first 3 are pretty cut and dried. They're pretty easy to understand, and it's measurable, so to speak. You can understand those terms. The 4th is really to prevent the grooming. And grooming means the process whereby the abuser starts to encroach on the boundaries of the child and sort of gets before, like I said, right? Very few people abuse right away because they don't know anything about the children. So they sort of invade their space a little bit at a time. And in other words, let's say physical touching, okay? So an abuser would be insane. And the one thing these people are, that they're evil and horrible people, but most of them, many or most, especially the ones who are serial, who get away with this for a long time, aren't foolish. They're cunning and evil and deadly and all of that. But they're smart enough to know not to go over to a child and abuse them right away. Again, they don't know anything about them. So they put a hand on the shoulder. Let's say we're talking about physical space. So they won't grab them in a private space. They'll put a hand on the shoulder. Let's see how the child reacts. If you spoke to your children and you say, if someone touches you, someone makes you feel uncomfortable, then they might feel a little weird, especially if that hand was there for a while. So they'll give a look. They'll look. And then the abuser knows that they were spoken to. This is not a safe kid because he or she was sensitive to my getting into their space. Okay, so that's the notion, is to trust your instincts, to trust your instincts. And when the children feel uncomfortable, they should get out. It's very important to note that very often the children don't have the language to be able to communicate to you why they felt uncomfortable. Okay, so let's give this example with the shoulder, right? Someone's puts a hand on the shoulder. The kid comes home and says, Mom, I had to get away from a situation. So-and-so made me feel very uncomfortable. Did he touch you in a private space? No. What happened? He touched me on the shoulder. So the parent naturally says, oh, thank God. Now, the child perhaps didn't articulate that that person was standing very close to him or her, or that that hand was there for a very long time, or it started sliding down. Okay, so nothing wrong was done. The abuser, in all likelihood, won't get into legal trouble or something for that because they didn't do anything yet. But the children felt that, children felt uncomfortable. You're really telling them to trust their instincts and giving them permission to get out, tell you about that they left the situation. And even if it's somebody prominent, even if it's a grandparent, even if it's someone they deeply respect, they can still get out if they feel uncomfortable. And you tell your parents and in-laws that one way they really can support the children. Sometimes it's a difficult conversation. I'm 62 years old, folks. And my generation, we didn't have child safety education. We didn't raise our children this way. Our oldest child, Kanara, is 40 years old. So it was a different world. Our youngest child is 26. So we didn't have any of that stuff. We didn't know about that. So people my age, look, I'm an educator and this is what I do, but it's very possible that your parents or your in-laws won't be sensitive to this. So if your father-in-law, your mother-in-law, your parents, an uncle gives the kids these mushy kisses that they don't like, and they go like this and say, stop that, that's where you step in and you say, I'm sorry, pull them aside and say, look, Yitzi felt very uncomfortable, Aviva felt uncomfortable, please don't do it again. Ideally, they could say it and get them comfortable saying it, that they can, if they feel uncomfortable. I just left the home of one of our grandchildren and their parents. Let's get the important part first. So just literally, I told it to our grandson 2 hours ago. We were talking. I forgot already what it was. I don't remember. It was something. I give the kids rides. I make a fool out of myself, like every other grandparent. And I always tell the kids, if you don't like what Zaidi's doing, tell me and I'll stop. And they have. They'll tell me sometimes they don't like this, they don't like that. The kids don't want to be tickled. Again, it doesn't mean that that person is doing anything wrong. It just means that the kids have a right to say, I don't want to be tickled. I don't like what you're doing. Please stop. So if you can ask, again, you can follow up about anything during Q&A. And that's why it's so important to, have some tech support with this to be able to go over this. But this is a really very important component. And you might want to preempt this, or if you have, you might want to just inform your parents and in-laws that, we've been doing child safety training with the children. Here's what the experts are saying. And we would love it if you would support this notion by telling the grandkids, by telling the kids that if there's anything that they're not comfortable while you're doing things with them. In other words, that If it makes them uncomfortable, they should tell you to stop. So that's the fourth item in this list, so to speak, of things that we teach our children. And this should and could be reinforced constantly in so many different ways. Well, maybe we'll talk about them. Maybe you'll get to them with Q&A, and be creative. I've heard over the years, I've heard so many brilliant things that parents did. This isn't like the Shulchan Aruch and you're not allowed to add anything to it. This is a framework. It's a way to keep your children safe. And according to your situation and according to what's going on in your children's lives, be creative as you can, and anything you can add to this is helpful. A Hasidic fellow in Brooklyn called me years ago that it was one of the most creative things I'd heard from a parent, in terms of, I always keep my ears open to find out, some best practices that I could share with audiences. And this fellow actually, he was, I strongly encourage you to do this. He told me, I asked him, I'm sorry, let me get to that. He bought his child a watch. He bought his son a watch, and because someone just came by mitzvah, and he said, keep this watch on you all the time. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, if somebody crowds you in a space, or if somebody makes you, and you can't get out, look at your watch and say, you're meeting me in 2 minutes. Okay. And the guy called me, he said, this is what I was thinking about before. I asked him, how'd you think of that? So he said, I literally went through the week's schedule of each of our children and I was looking for flashpoints. I was looking for some points that might be unsupervised or danger zones where something could happen, which I thought was absolutely brilliant of him. So because he did that, he came up with this notion that the kid, now is bar mitzvah, he's going to shul by himself. So, he's much more likely to have somebody come over and get him in a space or whatever. So he told him, you get in a space, that's what you do. And the kid bailed out, and he was saved because of it. So anyway, whatever you can add is kol amarbin, like the Seder, we say to say whatever you add to the Pesach Seder, whatever you add to this is praiseworthy and beneficial. It's also, we should be aware ourselves, and in an age-appropriate way. This is probably not something that you could tell young children, but to be aware of the biases that we have, because we want to be respectful and because we teach our children to be respectful. Sometimes we give a pass, or we give too much leeway to people who are in positions of authority, like myself. Okay, I'll tell you a fascinating story. Dr. David Pelkowitz and I, the rabbi was kind enough to mention, when this Walder thing broke, I did a number of Instagram lives and some other Zoom talks that I thought parents could benefit from. If you're interested, you can go to my YouTube, my Instagram, which is at Yaakov Horowitz. I have a YouTube page also that's at Yaakov Horowitz, and the daily parenting clips that the rabbi spoke about are at Bright Beginnings Forum. So the interview with Dr. Pelkowitz, I also interviewed a therapist, a brilliant man, Rabbi Jonathan Schwartz, who did a talk on managing anxiety in your children about this. Thank God, hopefully, that has diminished a bit. But a woman during Dr. Pelkowitz, I'm sorry, it was the next night. The next night, I did a follow-up talk with Dr. Schwartz. During the Q&A, a woman got on and she said, Rabbi Horowitz, how could I trust you and Dr. Pelkowitz? And then she apologized 3 or 4 times. And she said, oh, I didn't mean that. I said, of course you meant it. I'm glad you asked the question. I said, but it's not about me. It's about your children. So be honest. It's a fair question. So she said, okay, so how can I said, okay, so how can I trust you? So I told her, don't. I said, if trust means that you think I'm an ethical person, and if you think that trust means that when I go through these issues, these items on child safety, you trust me that I did my homework and I wouldn't come and spout things that I don't know nothing about, and that I took the time to research and make sure that these are the right messages. I'm very honored by that. That you trust me. I'm honored that you respect me. But if trust means that you'll let me spend a half hour alone with your daughter in a room, don't trust me. It's that simple. So we shouldn't be giving a pass to people. I don't know details about the Walder case, but I can almost guarantee you that there were flagrant boundary violations years and years before that people didn't pick up on. So no excuses. There's a, Rabbi, can I ask you, Rabbi Joel, can you, I don't want to write while I'm talking. Can you, I'll mention some links and I'll send them to you, Rabbi, please. So
yeah, sure.
I don't want to make you my sofer, but so I want to send you something on grooming by Malcolm Gladwell. It's called In Plain View. That talks about how abusers get away with it and explains the grooming process. This that I'm talking now about people giving folks like me a break or a different set of rules, that's called the halo effect. Okay, I'll remind me, please, Rabbi. You can look it up, right? Or you can look it up right now. I was an 8th grade Rebbe, folks, so I'm used to having people do things while I'm talking. Don't worry about it. You can look it up right now. So look up the halo effect. And the reason this is important is because the more you recognize it, it doesn't mean that you'll be immune to it. That's the fascinating part. We still won't be immune to it in some ways, but at least you'll have a better chance of immunizing yourself to this if you at least read about it once and understand it. So there's a thing called a halo effect, that we make judgments on people based on what we know about them. If someone's attractive, if someone's handsome, if someone dresses well, you think that they're that they know things, or if somebody has a title before their name, there's somebody that you can trust with anything. So that's the halo effect. Learn about that. There's a thing called the theory of the just world. The theory of the just world. There are different terms for it. And that means that we desperately want to believe that the world is a fair place. And if the world was a fair place, guys like Walder would have been hit by lightning 20 years ago. So we don't want to be part of a world where things like this can happen and people can get away with horrible things like this. So we delude ourselves into thinking that everybody's wonderful because we don't want to live in a world where people are horrible. And I saw something fascinating about 6-8 months ago. I was looking up the research on this theory of the just world, a just world hypothesis, it's called. There are other terms for it. Someone did a fascinating study and found out that people of faith have a bigger problem with this than people who are not religiously observant. I don't just mean Jews, people who practice, who consider themselves people of faith in any religion, were more likely to be offended by the notion that there's no, as we say, din v'dayin, there's no justice and it's not a fair place. Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem, Hadieni nas drachacha, because he was troubled why good people are suffering. So all of these pieces are helpful for you to read about. Let's say the piece by Malcolm Gladwell, In Plain View, that will get you in touch with the grooming process to understand that better. But the halo effect and the theory of the just world will let you be aware when these things kind of play with your brain and say, can't be, or how could this happen? So that's it. So, study child safety, learn as much as you can about parenting. We just started on the daily parenting clips. We just did, we started on June 1st. I did a whole host of topics, and July 2nd, we just started doing adolescence. And we did a number of pieces, different skills about to understand adolescence better. And the reason that this is important especially with adolescents, is children generally will be more compliant and more likely to share information with you. And the things that they'll, generally speaking, tell you about are not that significant. The significant meaning, because it's so rare for children for abusers to go 0 to 60, stop abusing right away, it's easier to get little kids to talk about stuff. We know teenagers, it's very difficult to get them to share life with us and talk about things. So with that in mind, it's much more important that we really understand adolescence and why teenagers behave the way they do, and to understand so many different components about it, and to really get your children comfortable having uncomfortable conversations with you. Because especially an older child, if they're going to come and tell you something, they're not going to be comfortable talking about it. So it's important to tell them that they can tell you anything. And it's not just saying those words, it's living it. And how to get that. If you want to, you can go to my YouTube page. I did a talk specifically about this, about having children be comfortable talking to their parents about anything. I actually brought our daughter, our youngest child, Sarah Horowitz, she happens to be a therapist. She came on with me and she did Q&A because I wanted the parents to ask her what it was like growing up in a home where you were able to talk to your parents about anything. She was much better than I was. But it's really an important thing, and not only for child safety. I really encourage you. One of the things we're working on in the parenting series is thinking about, do I want to be a supervisor as a parent, or do I want to be a mentor? Do you want to supervise your children, or would you love to be a mentor for all of their life? These are tough questions. And we did Rav Shlomo Velba's. I did a week on Rav Velba's planting and building. We did a week on the 4 parenting styles. There's so much to learn that will help you in this space of child safety and in all areas of parenting, whether it's vices, speaking to your kids about vaping and about smoking, about drug use, about anything. Getting them comfortable talking to you about uncomfortable things is just an extraordinarily important thing to do. So I'll turn it over to you now, and please, if you wanted, you can. I believe that you should all have like a digital. You could wave a digital hand there, I believe, or you could chat a question, and I'll be glad to answer it. Rav Joel, take the controls, please. And if anybody has questions, please, you can ask anything. It's all good, and it's really important that you have the ability to ask questions, ask for clarification. Okay, all of these things are very important. Please go. Anybody? I believe you're all muted. Rabbi Joel, can you?
Yeah. So thank you so much, Rabbi Horowitz. People should be able to unmute themselves. If anybody wants to write a question, would prefer to write a question in the chat, or would prefer to send it anonymously, and then I'll read them out. That's also fine. Otherwise, if people would like to just unmute themselves and ask a question, as Rabbi Horowitz said, you can ask about anything. I really feel like
absolutely anything, really.
You got to scratch the surface here, but it's been so important and it's been so helpful. So thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Anyone, go ahead, please. I can't believe I did such a good job. Come on.
Okay, so there's one question that's coming here through in the chat, and somebody's asked, from what age should we start talking to our children about this?
Great question. Good, excellent. So we found, we have a child safety book. It's called Let's Stay Safe. We found that it's already helpful at 2.5, 3 years old on of course, on an age appropriate level. One of the things that I would encourage you, whoever asked the question, and all of you, here, like I'll be a typical Jewish fellow and answer a question with a question. How old does a child have to be to realize that things belong to them. Think about it. How old do they have to be, folks? I say 2, 3, right? You teach children that things belong to them. If you don't believe me, take a kid's pacifier away, you'll find out. So you can start reinforcing this notion, things belong to you. Again, as we said earlier at the beginning, this is part of the child safety package, which begins by teaching children about their own personal space. So you can certainly start talking to them at a young age. And we made our book, which we published together with ArtScroll. We did it specifically with no frightening images and a very comfortable, it's a reader that you can sit on the couch and read to your kids. We're doing a project now that I am not going to rest until I do. I want to get a book in every Jewish home. So we're running it like we're doing $5 a book for bulk sales. So, so families can access the book without, any financial hardship. But we specifically set up the book. If you look at it, the pictures are all very friendly. And we actually put child safety in the middle. It's like a sandwich. It talks about helmets and bicycle safety and then stranger danger. And then we got to the meat and potatoes, in the middle of the book. There's 6 pages about child abuse. These pages of the messages that we spoke about. And we actually did that so parents shouldn't be nervous starting to talk to their children right away. I hope I answered your question. Please, I think I saw a digital hand.
Hi, Rabbi Horowitz. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I know I sound American, but I'm living in London.
I want to tell you something. I'm always intimidated when I'm on a panel or I'm speaking together with folks from the UK, because once you guys start talking, you sound so much more intelligent than I do. It adds points to your IQ. So it's nice to speak to another American. Go ahead, please. Not going to be a
First, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. My husband and I have been following. We have your book. Let's stay safe. But we have a question. So we've been talking to our daughter about all those topics, the 4 points that you mentioned. But do you have any tips of what we could say to friends and family who we find to be maybe getting a little too close or a little too touchy with their daughter, and just things to say to them to not make them feel like we're accusing them of doing anything appropriate, but just being mindful.
Right.
So we can be respectful.
So I think I briefly touched upon it. I mentioned it earlier. I think a good way to do this is to tell whomever that is, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle or whatever, to tell them that I just want you to be aware that we've been doing child safety training, and this is what we were told to tell the children. So, I'm not making a value judgment on what you do with your children or whatever, or the fact that things have changed over the past generation, but we were told very strongly that since we're teaching our children these messages, that they have a right to say no if someone makes them uncomfortable, or that people shouldn't be crowding their space or assuming that they have access to their, close range, to be close up to them. And you ask them to please understand. And, could you please be respectful of the messages that we're telling our children, and adhere to it while you're with our kids. Does that make sense?
That sounds good. Thank you.
It sounds good to you. Now it sounds good to them is the question. I promise you, I tell parents, when parents ask me and tell me that their parents or in-laws don't do it, I tell them, ask them nicely, ask them another time, and don't go. Say, we're not going. My kid has asthma and you're smoking. I mean it. I don't say radical. I don't want to sound like I'm radical. I'm not. I like to think I'm a moderate. Everybody does, I guess. But you can't finesse this. In other words, if someone can get away with, if someone can make them feel uncomfortable and they don't listen to what you're saying, or they don't listen to what the child is, if the kid goes like this, and says, please don't do that. First of all, like I said, when we're raising our kids, nobody that would have been like a pretty weird thing for kids to say. So they might look at it strange and say, go around, ask people, in the know, go to any therapist, go to people in educators in schools. They'll tell you that this is how we're training our children today. And it's, so please, just to ask you, please cooperate with us. And that's it. I don't, there really is no better, nicer way to do this. It's polite, but I think you have to stick to your guns, because it undermines everything you're trying to teach them. Okay, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great, sure. I see a hand. Julian?
Okay, Julian.
You want to unmute yourself, Julian? I think I just unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear, yes, sir.
Okay.
You're not an American. You're not an American.
No,
self-esteem.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead,
Guilty as charged.
Yes.
Two things, if I may. One is to share an idea with you, and to simply ask you a question. When my son was a teenager, and my wife picked him up from school one day, she sensed that he was subdued. And she said, everything okay? And it gradually came out that one of the teachers had, I'm not saying behaved inappropriately, but there was an element of concern. She immediately turned the car around, went straight back to the school, confronted the teacher and said, you will never behave inappropriately to my son ever again, or you'll answer to me, and I'm reporting you to the headmaster now, which she did. And it stopped completely, and she nipped it in the bud. And all I would say is, I think that's quite a sound policy. I don't know whether you have any comment on that, but the other point I wanted to share with you that sometimes siblings share with other siblings before they share with their parents. And so it may be an idea for a parent to have a closer relationship with an elder child, because they will then hear what younger child may confide in them.
That sounds like a very good idea. That sounds like a very good idea. The only, and if you would do that, I would just tell the children, the older children, or the younger kids, saying, look, that normally we respect confidentiality, and we would tell you not to tell things over to us that that aren't important, but this is a matter of safety, and therefore I would just add that as a caveat.
Yeah.
I used to have a rule when I was a Rabbi and later in yeshiva, I never let the kids tattle on each other. If the kids would complain, if it was a school rule, in other words, let's say I said no eating in class, and the kid was swiping the snack, whatever. So, hey, Rabbi, he's eating. So it's just like a problem. Go away. You can't do that. Why? Because I said, you got into a fight with him. You want me to punish him so you'll get even? I said, I'm not your stick. No. God, take care of yourself. So, but we said, if somebody's safety isn't that's a different situation. So you might want to just mention that. And as far as parents speaking up for their children, look, I don't know exactly what went on there, but I absolutely am all for transparency. The only thing I would say with that, and as a point, is that if it was something that's more of a grooming thing and it's generational, you might want to go a little easier on the person the first time. I'll tell you something that I've noticed a lot. Julian is your name?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. If you do a Google search, like I said, anytime, now included, you do a Google search, signs that your child is being groomed. I'm telling you, 30 years ago, when our boys were going to yeshiva, those are exactly the things we wanted in our children's Rebbe. Okay? You look at what it says, takes an interest in the children after school, buys them treats, spends time talking to them. So those are the things you would give your back teeth to have a Rebbe like that who put an arm around the kid. I tell people not to do it anymore, and that they shouldn't take children out alone, and that they shouldn't give treats to one child unless it's across the board or for very clear achievement. So you'll find, just like I said, some grandparents won't understand what you're saying. I do classes on child safety in schools, and very often people my age or close to my age even close to my age, feel that that's what chinuch is all about. It's all about a relationship with the kid, right? So I'm saying if it was something along those lines, rather than, you didn't say what it was. I'm saying if it was something like that, I might just go over and talk.
Well, it was actually more bullying than grooming, but
Okay.
it's still inappropriate.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I'm just pointing out that, and I tell parents, when we see grooming type activities that sort of changed over the past generation, and some folks didn't get the memo, so you need to send them the memo, but just to differentiate between that, let's say, and something aggressive that should never happen, or touching a child's private space, or something even less than a private space in a way. I just wanted to just point that out as a caveat. Sometimes sometimes people, if people feel that you're coming along in an extreme way, they might tend to dismiss what you're saying. They might be more likely to dismiss it. I'm not saying you were extreme. I'm saying to people, because it's a generational thing. Folks my age who are being treated like abusers when they do grooming activity that they've been doing all along, it's a process. That's all. Anybody else, folks?
Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Did I answer your question?
You did.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
Okay, so we'll see if anybody else puts up their hand, but in the meantime, there's a couple of other questions come through the chat.
Please.
Maybe building on an earlier question which you answered, which, in terms of what age and what age we can start discussing. And at the beginning, you mentioned the idea that we're not here, we're trying to empower, we're not trying to scare anybody, we're not trying to cause anxiety. And I guess the question that's been asked is, how do we find the balance between, on the one hand, not trying to scare our kids, not trying to cause anxiety,
right?
Going into too much detail in terms of these kind of things, but on the other side, you want to be realistic. You want to give them, you want to give them the tools to empower them.
Exactly. So I asked that to Dr. David Pelkowitz when he was so incredibly gracious, and I'm so deeply grateful to him that he gave me so much time when I started working in this place. And I said, like, Dr. David, right? I asked him that question, and he said that the research shows that we should have conversations with our children around the 2-3 anxiety out of 10. If 10 is super anxious and 0 is, and 1 is very little. In other words, enough to know that it's different than brushing your teeth or don't chew with your mouth open. It's something serious, but it's not, a 5-alarm fire. It's not something like that. That's what Dr. Pelkowitz says the research found to be most effective because, like I said, if we overly frighten them, we unsettle them. You can Google search anyone, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow has a whole thing on a hierarchy of needs. I happen to do a unit on that in our parenting clips also. I think it's very important for parents to understand this, what Maslow's trying to teach us, that if security is missing, it's very hard to learn something. So that would be the answer. A moderate amount of anxiety. It's important, but it's not as fearful as we know it to be. And even though, look, I didn't tell you any scary stories. Some would say it's more effective when you do. Research shows that it's not. So, that's the balance. Okay. Rabbi, anything else that someone sent in?
Yeah, there's a follow-up there which has just come in, which is preventive. What about if a child says something's actually happened?
Okay, it's a great question. Excellent question. Thank you. Perhaps I should have pointed that out. So you can also look up signs that a child was abused. The things that the experts say to look for are sudden fears, an extreme change in behavior. In other words, when parents say that, my child is no longer religious, or my child is having tremendous difficulty in school, I add, when did it start and how abrupt was it? So if you see like this, a slow slide, that's usually within the realm of life. But when you see a tremendous dip, when you see almost overnight, they start developing new fears. They have bedwetting. They mention that they're afraid to go certain places that they never spoke about before. Tremendous anger, that they feel, because they can't process the fact that they were being victimized. So it comes out in many, the sadness, again, one of the biggest pointers is a demonstrative change in behavior over a short period of time is usually something that's trauma-based. If you even suspect that your children are abused, don't come to guys like me. I like to think I'm okay with presenting this material, but this is something for a trained therapist who specializes in child sexual abuse, and especially if a child was abused, folks, I don't believe that any human being has the tools to be able to undo that damage by themselves. So that's something, at that point, you say, exit stage left and get a professional involved that specializes in this area.
So on that note, I'll just point out and thank Yehudis, who's pointed out here in the chat, that's Migdal Emunah, which is a UK-based organization that does assist with professional support around.
That's great.
Just put your questions, tools, signposting, therapy, etc. So people can.
Great.
Yeah, thanks. So just maybe one final question, and with this way in, but also changing track a little bit.
Sure.
Somebody asked before, we were talking about ages as well, and somebody asked the question, at what age should one be discussing the topic of how children come into the world?
Yeah, so this was a little bit, it's generational. This was also at the beginning, this is parenthetically, the experts say that children, we should be comfortable having conversations with children about their body parts, what the names for the body parts are, and not like sort of get uncomfortable. That's also, I happen to have a hard time with that one. I'm not such a prude, but but the experts say that we're supposed to get the children comfortable defining their body parts by the way it's referred to. I think I recommend parents speaking to children like a year or two before puberty starts in some of their classmates. That would probably be a good time. So let's say if 12, 13 is puberty time, so like 10, and you can have, the most important component of that conversation is that they can come back and talk to you. Is that you give them some basic information, and you tell them that they can, if they have any questions, they can come and talk to you about it. It's interesting. I found not only that in this area, but in many other areas, the children have, it's not that they don't have information, they have a lot of incorrect information. They don't have the right information. They have stuff that they heard in the playground, the stuff that they saw, and by the way, there's nothing to do with the internet. When I started teaching 40 years ago, I went to some colleagues of mine and I asked them, psukim in Chumash or parts of the Gemara that mentions things of sexual nature. What do you, how do you deal with it? So I asked 3 or 4 colleagues of mine. One of them was a 6th grade Rabbi, and he said, "Hey, Yanky, you want a good laugh?" He said, a few years ago, he kind of skipped it. I never skipped it, by the way. I used to learn through them, and I just would explain what the Gemara is talking about at the Chumashes, and if you have questions, you can come to me. I would say, you're old enough to be able to have a mature conversation about it. If you have a question, you can come talk to me. And when you say you're old enough to have a mature conversation, that usually stops kids from saying funny things. So anyways, he told the kid, he skipped the pasuk. So one of the kids raised his hand. He says, "Hey, Rabbi," he was teaching a 6th grade 45 years ago. He said, if there's something you don't know, we'll be glad to tell you. Like, it's a true story, so and then sometimes, like, we attribute, because we're uncomfortable about this, we sometimes tend to lead things into this, and maybe kids are having questions that are more innocuous. They tell a story that this little kid comes home from school, a 6-7-year-old kid. He says, "Mommy, where did we come from?" So I said, "Uh-oh, here we go." And she starts saying, well, when 2 people love each other, and she goes into the whole spiel. And then the kid's looking at her, and he says, "Oh, because my friend Jimmy said he came from Boston." So sometimes like the children are totally not on this page, but it is good to give them basic information. And most importantly, really most importantly about any of this is that the children can come and talk to you. And if you want to talk about a best practice or a message that I found as someone in the space absolutely fascinating, there was a large prominent school in the New York area had a terrible child abuse scandal a number of years ago, where an administrator in the school, I believe it was an assistant principal, was found to was making. He had access to the kids' social media, accounts and their email addresses, and this guy was posing as a girl. It happened to have been a co-ed school, and the school handled it brilliantly. They did everything they should have when they found out. But just parenthetically, but what happened was, so this male administrator was opening up accounts pretending to be a female, and was sending his own students, again really sick, he was sending his own students pictures of girls in various stages of undress. And then he would start off mildly, and the kids send me a picture of you, and they would go back and forth. And then he, posing as a girl, would up the ante and send more provocative pictures, and eventually naked pictures, sending pictures, nudes of themselves, and say, "You got to send me." And sooner or later, the kids would back out, and then the message would come back and say, "If you back out, I'm going to post it all over the internet. Whatever you sent me so far, I don't care. You can post my picture." That was this horrible spiel that this person did. I'm sorry for getting graphic and going into this. The takeaway is so important, parents. It stopped because a 15-year-old kid told his parents, who told the administrator. And Reb Joel, what my first reaction was? Wow, I would love to interview those parents. Could you imagine? I had the opportunity to, but I didn't. I knew someone who knew them. I said, no, chas v'shalom, but because I mentioned to a colleague of mine, I said, boy, I'd love to meet these parents and find out what they did. Think of that conversation, Reb Joel. Just imagine. The kid came home with 15 kids. Said, "Oh, Mom, Dad, I was sending naked pictures of myself to a girl, and right?" Could you imagine like how that went down, that the child was comfortable enough confiding to his parents? So like, to me, that was just a remarkable best practice that the parents gave the children the self-confidence that they can have conversations like this with their kids. So, and that stops them from the next, from getting further into trouble. So I'm saying like, I think that's the takeaway message for parents, is get your kids comfortable having these conversations with you. So that's why I said, if you're asking when to talk about the birds and the bees and the body parts and all of that, it's important that it's the beginning of a conversation, and you can come talk to me about anything. One last thing, folks, again, not directly related to this, but along this notion of having open communication with your children. I spent about 20 years writing and lecturing and begging people not to ply kids with alcohol and cigarettes on Purim. And a few years ago, you send this out as another, another thing parents might want to see. I wrote a piece in the Times of Israel, and it's a video that I made in a YouTube video on my page. I told parents to give their children a no questions asked pickup. That means we told you not to drink, but what happens if you didn't listen to us and you got drunk? You can call us. We will pick you up. Promise, we won't discuss it for 48 hours. We'll talk to you about it sometime, but not right now. You don't have to worry that we're going to take your head off. And I wrote there, because it was my experience over the years, that so many kids got into more and more trouble because they were afraid to stop it and do what that 15-year-old kid did. They were afraid to tell their parents, Mom, Dad, I'm sorry, I didn't listen, I got drunk. I'm in so-and-so's house, please pick me up. So I told parents to give the kids no questions asked pickup. I happen to have gotten fantastic feedback from parents. In fact, some people call me later that it really saved their kids. What happens is the kids are out at a party, they're drunk, they can't come back for 3 hours, so they go to sleep on somebody's lawn, or they go home with somebody who's drinking, who's someone who gets behind the wheel, who's under the influence, and it's sakonas nefashos, but they have no other choice because they're afraid to. So I think this balance, parents, this balance about when you speak to your children, I'm encouraging you to think ahead a few steps and say, what happens if our child gets into situations that they regret or feel uncomfortable about? I want them to be able to talk to me about it. And this initial conversation about sex or bodies or anything like that is a good way to say, I'm someone you can talk to about anything. So that no question, it's called no, you can look at it, no questions asked pickup. And you know what I said, Rabbi Joel, I wrote at the I think it was in the article of the talk. I said, you know what you're really telling your children? Your life, I think I titled the video, your life is more important than my rules. Your life is more important than my rules. We made rules. We want you to listen to them. Your life is more important. So if your life is in danger because you did something foolish, like a teenager does, don't be reticent to talk to us about it. You can talk to us about that too. And I think that's like a portal into all sorts of great relationships with your teens and adults. Get them used to talking to you specifically about uncomfortable things.
Horowitz, thank you so much.
My greatest pleasure.
Really, I think you've given us
I hope you found it helpful.
I'm sure I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I can say that you've given me an invaluable toolkit this evening of how to begin these conversations. I'll say as a community as well, the two communities here, Magen Avot and Hendon United. This is, I think, just the beginning of this conversation as well. We have a number of other events following on from this coming up in the next few months. So please stay tuned for those. And all the resources and the links which you mentioned are available in the chat. Otherwise, people can go and can find. The book is called Let's Stay Safe. It's available on Amazon. Bright Beginnings. You can search on social media, the WhatsApp, Yaakov Horowitz on YouTube as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Rabbi. I just want to tell you, folks, I just started something a few days ago where I take questions on my Instagram, on Yaakov Horowitz page. You can direct message and I respond in an under a minute clip that goes on the stories on Instagram. So I just tried this as a more effective or a more immediate way of getting, being able to give guidance to parents who have questions. So I'm just experimenting. I just started it last week. So if any of you want to send a direct message to Yaakov Horowitz, if it's under 100 words, don't put any details, in a way that I can cut it and paste it onto a story and then respond to it like that. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Rabbi.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think we'll definitely tap into that resource as well.
Okay, be well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, all of you. I hope you found it helpful.